Welcome to City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. A recent audit has shown about $13 million in unaccounted funds for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, part of a history of financial problems for the agency. So is it time to shut down the KCRHA?
We're fixing our fragmented response system so that we can make best use of our resources to make a difference in people's lives.
The KCRHA launched in 2019 with a noble vision to find a regional answer for the regional problem of homelessness.
You know, I think that we are seeing some pretty significant success.
But a parade of different leaders over the years has overseen a series of financial troubles, and the April audit has some elected leaders saying the KCRHA needs to be dismantled.
It is time to find a different way to make this very important work happen.
The KCRHA's current CEO, who requested the audit, is pushing back.
The audit did not find evidence of fraud or misuse of funds.
So what's behind the drive to close down the KCRHA?
They are not a little bit in the red. They are big time in the red.
Our panel weighs in on what's next for the embattled agency.
We cannot afford to spend money on recreation of new bureaucracies.
Should the Regional Homelessness Authority no longer be in authority? That's next on City Inside Out. Thanks again for joining us on City Inside Out here on the Seattle channel. I'm Brian Callanan, and I am joined by two people with some different perspectives on the future of the KCRHA. One of those people is King County Councilmember Rod Dembowski, who has introduced a resolution to dissolve the KCRHA. Councilmember Dembowski, good to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Also with us is Lisa Daugaard, co-director of Purpose Dignity Action, an advocacy group that has worked on issues around homelessness and public safety for decades. Lisa, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Let's jump in, Councilmember Dembowski, to start with you and talk about how we got here, if we could. So you were on the County Council in December of 2019, which at the time voted to approve this interlocal agreement to launch the Regional Homelessness Authority along with the Seattle City Council. You were a co-sponsor on that legislation. You voted to approve it in an 8-1 vote. What was your perspective on the RHA then?
Well, as transmitted, I was not supportive of it when it came over, and I worked really hard with some other electeds and through the Regional Policy Committee to modify it.
Make some amendments and so forth.
Absolutely, and it really changed it. The idea originally, Brian, was to centralize the region's response to homelessness, bring the county, the city, and hopefully our suburban city partners, the 38 of them, together and have a coordinated response around the region, but also to take the politicians out of it. That was the idea, to remove elected officials' oversight. That was what came over. They wanted the folks with lived experience to run this and to spend $200+ million a year of taxpayer money. I did not like that. I felt that we should have an accountability loop to the voters and the taxpayers on the most important public policy challenge of the last 10 years. Homelessness.
Yes.
And so we added elected oversight. We brought the regional leaders in with an equal voice and did some reforms. And on that basis, I said, let's give it a shot. And that was kind of a trend that was going on at the time, to bring and empower folks who have lived through the challenges personally to the table and have authority. I just felt in our democratic system with taxpayer money and a big public policy idea, you ought to have some electeds there, and that's what was set up.
Okay, thank you for that. Lisa, let me ask you about this, because I've heard from so many advocates that the way KCRHA was established didn't give it a great solid foundation from the beginning here. What was your initial take on the KCRHA? Did you have concerns about how it was structured?
Yeah, let me just start by saying I think Councilmember Dembowski and I do have some differences in perspective, but on this key point about his initial stance, we strongly agree. This kind of public investment has to be overseen by the people who are elected to be responsible for spending public funds. And so that was always a concern about the initial concept, and I think it was correct to insist on putting elected officials in a governing oversight position. Whether they've discharged that responsibility effectively, I think, is a separate question. But I do want to go back to the origin story of KCRHA. What Councilmember Dembowski related was that was what was said to be needed, a regional approach, a regional solution. But the backstory actually, I think, is more interesting and revealing. So in 2018, the Chamber of Commerce commissioned the McKinsey company to
Yes.
do an assessment. Actually, it was pro bono. I guess they didn't pay for it, but they nonetheless obtained this analysis of what it would take to meaningfully resolve unsheltered homelessness.
I remember that,
in
yeah.
King County. And McKinsey, I think unexpectedly to the chamber, found that it would require doubling the expenditures of local investments. And that was a conservative calculation, assuming that we didn't even need to build anything. And their key finding was that all the talk about sort of efficiencies and structural changes would not, you could do that perfectly, and you would not make a dent in our homelessness situation because the fundamental problem was one of resources. And after that report came out, there was an incredible sort of focus by elected officials, both from the mayor's office at the time, it was Mayor Durkin, and from the exec's office, about how we needed this structural change. And really, I think that was a diversion, and that was the perspective of many of us at the time, many providers, that, I mean, you could reorganize the structure, but that cannot substitute for adequacy of resources and strategy. And that at the end, you could do that, but if you didn't address resources and strategy, we would be in essentially the same place. And that is what happened.
Okay, please, yeah.
On that point, and I think this is one of the tragedies of the Regional Homelessness Authority, is because of their failed performance, there has been a reluctance to deliver more resources to them because they haven't delivered on treating our contractors right. There's been delays there. They haven't really delivered on providing better services. It hasn't been more coordinated. And so those of us who, I'm the budget chair, write checks for the public money have not sent money there. And in fact, you've seen the city of Seattle withdraw funds.
Yes.
And that, sadly, is kind of one of the results. Lisa's right. There is a need for more resources. But would you write a check to the King County Regional Homelessness Authority? Would anybody? No.
But I do want to say, because this was originally set up to, in my opinion, divert from the question of resources and sort of pretend that a new structure would be a game changer. I don't think there was ever an intention to increase the resources, and in a way that organization was set up to fail. So the leaders that took, I mean, I think you would have to be crazy to take that job because the charge was massive. There was absolutely no, it does not have its own revenue source, nor was there any commitment or promise to really match the assignment with the necessary resources. So from the beginning, their assignment was to kind of pretend that it was possible with the cards that they held to do an assignment that was not matched with the resources that had been committed.
I do want to move on to another point here, just get to the present day of this audit that came out in April here. And Lisa, let me start with you here. So this audit said that the agency, KCRHA, has received about $534 million over the past 6 years. It's currently about $38 million in the red. The audit also said there's about $13 million unaccounted for on the books. No evidence of fraud, the audit said, but the risk of fraud still exists. I hear what you're saying about not getting enough resources, but with the resources that they did have, what do those numbers say to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that this is not, you can't be in this situation. You have to be able to account for every dollar of public funds that an agency receives. So that has to be fixed. Nor are they the only public entity that has recently had similar findings. So we can't have this, and this is one area where I know I completely agree with Councilmember Dembowski and all the other elected officials that have expressed concern. I do want to flag, though, that being in the red, they were always set up to be in the red. They started out. They have to pay us, and we don't currently hold a contract with KCRHA,
Meaning
but
pay
we have
service providers,
service providers. When we perform services, and if they are not currently holding reimbursements from the city and the county, it doesn't matter, they still have to pay us. That going into the red practice really started when appropriately, there was public pressure to fix the long delays in reimbursing contractors. They do now pay us on time. They're actually a high-performing public agency in that regard. But in order to do that, they had to create this structure of sort of going into the red to make timely payments. That's a setup to fail situation. That's not necessarily of KCRHA's making.
Fair enough. I do want to make sure I talk about this audit with you, Councilmember Dembowski, because I'm thinking about the CEO of the KCRHA, Dr. Kelly Kinnison. She said at a meeting a few weeks ago, she was the one who actually called for this audit. She welcomes this scrutiny. She's been on the job since August of 2024, says during her time, the agency has made some progress when it comes to its financial reporting. What's your response to that? Have you given her enough time? What's your thought?
Well, the audit is damning, and by the way, it only looked through June of last year. We don't know what's occurred in the 11 months since. I'll tell you, as the chair of the Budget Committee at the County Council, and I also sit on something called the Executive Finance Committee that oversees this. We are their bank at the county, and they've had, in April, almost a $40 million deficit. They are not a little bit in the red. They are big time in the red. And it's not just a timing of payments issue, which is what we were told for many years. We began to have an inkling that it could be worse than that, and that is why this audit was supported. They've overspent the allocation by many, many millions of dollars. They're in a debt, and there's going to have to be a bailout. The city and the county are going to have to bail them out. So it isn't just a matter of timing. It's kind of like, say, you've got a line of credit attached to your checking account, and maybe your expenses exceed your revenues a little bit, but at the end of the month or the year, you true up to zero. They're not trued up to zero. They are millions and millions and millions in the red. And that's a problem.
Okay. Can I talk about your hopes to deal with this? I know you had a resolution you've been working on here to potentially dismantle the KCRHA. As I understand it, you're trying to potentially wind down the partnership with the KCRHA over the course of possibly 12 months. I know this is a bit of a moving target, but tell me what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, so under the interlocal agreement that set it up as amended, either the city or the county has a right to a passing of a motion at the county or resolution of the city to start a dissolution process. It envisions about a 12-month period. Could be more, could be less, depending on what's required. And so we filed that motion, and the catalyst was this audit. But I just want to say the structure of this organization is you could fix all of the audit stuff. And by the way, they should have done it in 2023 when there were audits saying that they had problems, and they said we're working on it. Now we're in 2026, hasn't been solved. But the fundamental structure of this violates a basic fundamental principle for me of service to the public, and that is if you're going to be held accountable for something, you better have the responsibility for it. And it goes back to this setup. We devolved responsibility over to this separate entity with these boards.
Do you regret doing that? I mean, that's something you set up.
It is. I mean, we put the electeds there, but you do not have that direct line of accountability, and therefore I think the attention, the motivation to get it right, it's diminished. And you see in LA, for example, they set one of these up years ago. They're Los Angeles Regional. They've just voted to dissolve it because it had the same financial problems. They were not delivering on the results. And LA County said, give us this authority back because we think with our attention on the matter, it can work. Let me give you one example, Brian, if I can. If we dissolve this and say we bring back some regional functions to the county, we put about $43 million a year in. The city puts about $100 million a year in. The city can coordinate with their Human Services Department along with providing these shelter services. The county, we run the regional behavioral health system. That's a co-occurring issue in many cases. You could see a better performing system overall if you've got integration rather than separation of service in this space. So I think there's some opportunity to deliver a better response that's governed and paid attention to by folks who are working on it every day, that have direct accountability to the voters who want this addressed.
Okay. Lisa, I want to make sure I draw you in here because the timing of this is really important here, because I've heard some concerns from providers that say ending this agreement with the KCRHA potentially too quickly could result in some serious instability for people experiencing homelessness, as well as the organizations that serve them. Talk to me about this timeline, a year, maybe less, maybe more, that Councilmember Dembowski is talking about here. Is that taking things too fast? What do you have your eye on here?
Well, first of all, I don't want to speak for every homeless service provider in the region, but I do appreciate that the Coalition on Homelessness has provided some really important leadership here, and my organization is strongly aligned with their position on this, which is that we're asking the wrong question about whether and when KCRHA should be unwind. Many of us would not have recommended going down this path in the first place and warned that it wasn't a solution, but we are here now. We don't get to go back in history and sort of undo those mistakes. We can only go forward in a way that does the least harm and that puts us collectively in the best position to succeed. So those should really be the questions. And we're asking elected officials to approach this conversation now with a truly, genuinely open mind. The resolution that Councilmembers Barone, Fain, and Dembowski brought forward at the county actually does not presume an unwind. It is a sort of exploration, calls for an exploration. Of course, we support that. But the key things that we collectively have to bear in mind is we cannot afford to spend money on recreation of new bureaucracies, especially now. When KCRHA was created, there was an enormous one-time cost of building a new bureaucracy, and I guarantee you there will be an enormous one-time cost of undoing that bureaucracy and creating two more in its stead. Both the city and the county are looking at very serious structural budget deficits, operating budget deficits, and any dollar we spend on sort of moving the deck chairs on the Titanic about sort of the creation of bureaucracies is a dollar not available to meet fundamental human needs. So we should only do that if we absolutely have to do that, and there's not a way to carry forward by taking control of the structure that was built and achieving the accountability that Councilmember Dembowski mentioned.
Yeah. What did you? Oh, sorry. Briefly, could you, Lisa?
Yeah.
What was it? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say I think this could get worse, and there are things we could lose or stand to lose that we must not lose. One is we are right in the moment where new federal funding direction is about to be
continuum of care money
received, and KCRHA, as it's currently organized, is the sort of vehicle for our region to apply for and receive that federal funding. And they are doing a good job of strategizing how we need to sort of pivot and put ourselves in the best position to receive those funds. Okay. They have some great staff, and they have been the project manager for the best single response to unsheltered homelessness that we've seen as a region for many, many years. Okay. So we have some assets there that we need to not lose.
Can I put aside the federal piece just for a second? I think there was something you wanted to respond to earlier there.
My friend Lisa referenced the Titanic, and the KCRHA is the Titanic. And there may be some cost to move the deck chairs to the shore, but we've got to do it. And these short-term issues with respect to the continuum of care, funding from the feds, that's a 1 year, 2 year, maybe a couple grant cycles. We used to do that at the county. It was sent over to the KCRHA. That can be managed through, and it should be managed through carefully. But I don't think we should let some of these short-term transitional issues take away from what we've got as a long-term structural issue here that needs to be addressed.
But you're seeing the concern. I think I've heard it from some Seattle City Council members too. They kind of know what KCRHA is, but they don't know what KCRHA 2.0 is. So what would the homeless response for the county, the region look like? What can you present to assure taxpayers that you are being accountable, that their money is not going to waste?
Well, you know, I think KCRHA needs to answer those questions, and the answer is they haven't been accountable, and their money has gone to waste on a massive scale. They've got nearly 100 staff there at the authority. I mean, they came out with an unreasonable, ungrounded plan for $12 billion to solve the problem. That's the kind of conduct you get when you're not engaged with elected folks who are connected to the public. Look, I think we had this mantra. Homelessness is a regional problem, requires a regional response.
Do you believe that?
It is a regional problem, but I don't think we're acting, and I don't believe necessarily that a regional response is the right answer. We've got to have some regional coordination, but what works for the city of Seattle isn't really what the city of Auburn or the city of Bellevue or the city of Kenmore want to do. And we have responsible elected leaders, city councils and mayors all over this county who are stepping up in their own jurisdictions and responding to this. Lisa's outstanding organization works with communities like in Burien and in Seattle and up in Lake City. She sees that communities want to respond, and I think that you actually may see more resources delivered on a localized basis, responding to local need, if we, empower those. This notion of a top-down, Seattle-based, centralized answer to 2.3 million people countywide, our population, and the challenges in their communities, it may be just too big, too cumbersome.
I want to come back to you on that, but I wanted to make sure I brought you in here because this idea of getting all the different cities involved, that was a very important part of launching the KCRHA. And I think about this, King County and Seattle are the big money. They're the big money in this. There are 7 other cities that pay in. Coalition of 5 cities in North King County. You got Bellevue and Redmond too, but altogether, those 7 smaller cities are only paying in about $440,000 for a $205 million agency. Talk to me about that issue of having buy-in from cities outside of Seattle, because I think that was the push early, but it didn't really happen. Did that kill the KCRHA? And I don't mean to use the verb too strongly, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that Councilmember Dembowski is correct that we've now had 7 years of running that experiment, and it is not proven to be an effective way to forge a county-wide consensus on the way forward. And I want to call out Lorena Gonzalez, when she was on the city council, was the lone city council vote against, and this was one of the reasons that she cited, that the city and the county, city of Seattle and King County would pay for this. There was kind of, but would surrender policy direction to all the governments in the region, and that just hasn't worked. So, but I do think that the $12 billion plan, which is not that far off from what McKinsey said it would cost, by the way, to actually solve homelessness in King County. And some of the more extreme misfires have been corrected. There has already been structural reform. So the governing bodies have been, I think, appropriately restructured. And I think, county and city of Seattle leaders are in a position, should they so choose, to kind of pull on their big people pants and provide direction to this agency. They have the power to do that. It's awkward. It's an awkward structure, but it is not impossible to do that. So to me, it really, again, comes down to opportunity costs for the scarce resources that we're talking about. Okay. Talking about it will cost money to fix KCRHA might be an interesting exercise to say it has to be cost neutral and we have to make these changes. So what do we have to cut in order to do that? Not direct services. But it will certainly cost more than that to restructure these functions at the City of Seattle and King County collectively. So there's no free pass to unwinding this, and we can't pay for any unnecessary administrative expenditures.
Councilmember Dembowski, I want to make sure we talk to this whole idea of getting regional buy-in. Yeah. Homelessness certainly is a problem without borders here. How do you avoid going back to square one, where people who are homeless around our area just come to the cities that have resources? I think that's a big concern here too.
Yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that, but I just want to remind folks, since 1968, when the county charter was established by the voters, we are the regional government. We have systems and structures in place. For example, our public health department is regional. We do it in partnership with the City of Seattle. We have a regional policy committee that brings together City of Seattle council members, suburban city council members, county council members to work on these kind of issues. So there are forums, infrastructure, and systems in place at the county as your regional government to bring that work in. We also have a philosophy and an ethos of supporting our local city partners. Again, I don't think that all parts of the response here need to be regionalized, one size fits all. We should support our local cities and city councils and mayors who care about this issue because it's right in their neighborhood. They want to make investments. And I think that, that frankly is what's occurring.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Can be done.
Thank you. I need to start wrapping up, and I want to get an idea of what people can expect to see over the next few months when it comes to the KCRHA. Councilmember Dembowski, I can give you about a minute here. Is dismantling this agency a done deal in your mind?
It's not a done. In my mind, it should be done. Politically, there's still a conversation to have. So at the county, we've adopted the resolution that Lisa mentioned, that we're going to look at what it would take over the next 90 days, what it would look like. We'll engage with stakeholders, including providers, city partners, and others, to make sure that if we do this, that there would be a smooth transition, no disruption or minimal to our service providers. That's foundational. And yeah, it's going to cost us some money, but I think we've spent a lot of money. We've wasted a lot of money for 6 years, and I am not of the opinion that that waste will stop if we let it continue, just because of the fundamental problems with the structure. So that's what we're going to do over the next 90 days. We'll have a conversation and see in August where we are.
Okay, sounds good. Lisa, I'm going to let you wrap up here. What are you going to be working on over the next couple months as we head into summer to make sure vulnerable populations in our region aren't getting hurt by this?
Well, I think all of us are pleading with our elected officials to enter this next period with open minds and not like set a table for a conversation that has a foreordained conclusion. And at that table, I think it's not completely clear, but providers need to be there. The exclusion of experts in the field from the formation of KCRHA in its early months and years is one of the reasons it set off so in such a shaky way. We need to not repeat that mistake. So we ask that providers be at the table for those conversations and that elected officials genuinely have an open mind to find the best road forward from here, even if they, as I think many do, regret that we started on this path. This is where we are, and we need to have a do no harm, open mind stance for the next 3 months.
Okay, real quickly.
Lisa's absolutely right. Providers need to be there, but the taxpayer and the voter and the general public needs to be there. Their interest needs to be there. And I will tell you, it is overwhelmingly apparent that the emperor has no clothes here. The public has said, this has failed, you need to end it. And I go back to that essential foundation of our democracy, the feedback and accountability loop and the trust with the voters who write the checks. And if they are not supportive of this, this is destined to fail no matter what the provider community wants.
Okay, all
But
right.
what comes next also needs not to fail that same public, and the expertise of elected officials and providers is needed to make sure that we're not back here in a couple of years regretting this choice.
Thank you both for that, and we will be right back.
What are people saying online about dissolving the KCRHA? One person writes, "Homelessness has become the media phrase for politicians to funnel money to themselves. They all claim to be working on getting people off the streets with billions, and yet we have more homeless than ever before." Another person says, "Calls to dissolve the agency immediately are not grounded in common sense and would create tremendous instability for people experiencing homelessness and the organizations that do the work." We'd like to know what you think. Email us at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media.
Great to have that feedback, and a big thanks to Co-Executive Director of Purpose Dignity Action, Lisa Daugaard. Also, a big thanks to Councilmember Rod Dembowski from King County Council. Really appreciate you being here.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
You bet. And we'll see you next time on City Inside Out.